Hey folks, how you doing? If you've been watching on YouTube, you're probably used to seeing our faces during our podcast, but you're not going to get that today. Okay, a little public service announcement. We recorded this podcast on the Kolbecast Podcast about a month and a half ago. We were guests on their podcast for the Kolbe Academy, and it was a great discussion. We wanted to re-air it here, but we don't have video for it, so just a heads up. Great audio content, but you won't see any faces staring back at you this time. All right, enjoy the podcast.
Many of our Kolbecast episodes are geared toward families who've been at this homeschooling gig for anywhere between just starting out and a good long while. But lately we've been getting requests from people for episodes to share with their friends, families, and curious onlookers about homeschooling, the reasons for it, and the decision to go for it. For some families, a decision to homeschool is a no-brainer or one that the spouses have made as part of their discernment to marriage. For others, the road to homeschooling is unexpected and perhaps fraught with trepidation and fear. Our guests today have some decision-making tools and other resources that parents can apply to this situation and others. Matt and Erin Ingold of Metanoia Catholic and hosts of the Catholic Coaching Podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kolbecast.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for having us.
We're delighted. I'm so glad to have you here. Thank you. At various times on the Kolbecast, Jordan, Stephen, and I have each related our homeschooling experiences and the way those have been and are part of our lives. Our focus today is on the steps leading up to this decision to homeschool and just after it. I've become a subscriber to the Catholic Coaching Podcast since hearing about it from a few trusted sources, and I've gotten a lot out of what Matt and Erin have to offer. I'm so delighted that they are here today to lend their expertise and guidance to this conversation. Matt and Erin, for our listeners not yet familiar with you, would you tell us about yourselves and your business and podcast and a little about how those came to be?
Yeah. Matt, you go.
Sure. I mean, like for us, we both of us grew up in Catholic families. I grew up in a convert home, and so the faith was always a part of our life. We worked in ministry for a time. It took us a while to get pregnant after we got married, and so we really were espoused to our church, and we saw that as our place to really have, extraordinary motherhood, extraordinary fatherhood. And the Lord finally blessed us with our daughter Abel, who's napping. And we're praying that she stays napping during this podcast right now. And it just came around that time in our lives, we realized that we were kind of stuck. And we went down to visit my parents down in Ave Maria, Florida, met up with an old classmate of Erin's, actually, from Franciscan University. Mm-hmm. And they were actually into life coaching. Now, we always kind of snubbed our nose at it. I personally did. It's just like,
yeah,
okay, like, what are you going to tell me about my life? Well, it turns out I had a lot to learn. And when we ended up getting involved with this coaching program, which was a secular program, we couldn't deny a lot of the fruits that were coming forth from it, really natural acquired virtue type fruits. We were starting to really take custody of our minds in a much better way. Be better stewards of our God-given faculties, of our intellect and our will. We started to grow in our ability to communicate with one another. Some really practical life skills that we took for granted that life was just going to hand to us. And no, these are real skills that somebody has to teach us. And as we were going through this, experiencing these undeniable fruits, we wanted to share this with a lot of people that we had ministered to in the past, thinking, man, if we had these tools when we were doing young adult ministry or youth ministry, it just would have been such great things to be able to provide for people. We started going down that way and having nothing but this secular resource to share with people. And some of our friends kind of put their hands up and said, whoa, some of the stuff isn't really that kosher. It doesn't really align up with our faith. And I said, we were like, yeah, we know you're right, but just kind of put that to the side,
Discern.
And
you can discern,
just
right?
approach these things with discernment. And we saw how problematic that was. And Erin at that point said, you know what? If this has been so fruitful in our lives, then it has to be in our church already. And Erin, you really went on a research project, kind of looking back into the lives of the saints and the doctors of the church. I was going through a program at Divine Mercy University, get a spiritual direction certification, just starting that. And so we're really digging into these resources, into the catechism. And lo and behold, some of the great things that we had been so transformative, we already found them there in our church. We just wanted to dust them off and represent them, and not finding any other coaching program that was authentically and just unapologetically Catholic. And also realizing that there is no way to promise somebody, guarantee somebody personal development by remove Christ at the same time, the actual change agent of the human person.
Yeah.
There's no way to do that. We said, you know what, the only way for us to be able to show up in integrity and really bring this as a resource to the church is to put Christ, the cornerstone, back where he belongs in this paradigm of self-development or personal development, which we really know is growing in the life of virtue and in the life of grace and in the life of increasing merit for not just you, but for the universal church as well. And so that was like really what gave birth to Metanoia Catholic, was the need to really bring a lot of this. And it's a $1 billion industry right now. And there's a lot of people,
not ours, but
but there's a lot of people that frankly it's a very subtle new age, subtle humanistic philosophy that's kind of baked into these programs that leads people down a path of bootstrapping and ungodly self-reliance
and even despair
and out of integrity and despair as well. And so it's just like, you know what, there's a better way of doing this. And we want to start that movement.
Yeah. And I felt just such conviction at the beginning of all of this that I was receiving training in how to be a mindset coach. And I was also making connections with the doctors of our faith, like the doctors of the church, just the traditional Catholic faith. And I was making these connections, and I was having other coaches come to me and say, I love my faith. How do I present this? How do I kind of navigate these somewhat seemingly new age waters and like not lead my clients astray?
Mm-hmm.
And I just kept thinking that the Lord was just saying, I have given this to you so that you can impart it to others. And that's really where the podcast started, was like, just give what you've been receiving and be along for the ride. You don't need to know it all right away. Just be along for the ride with your listeners. And at the beginning, I think it was maybe like 2 listeners, our moms at that point. I don't even think our dads really tapped into it yet. It was just our moms, our biggest fans. But it's grown since then. So we are delighted to be here and to help out with anything with, just practical life skills. That's one thing that we wanted to do. Take these abstract kind of lofty ideas, which are true, we believe are true in our faith, but also make them practical. How do we take something that is taught and is so high above us? How do we make it practical? That's like one of our favorite things to do.
And fun.
And fun.
And fun. That's the sanguine. She
Yeah.
wants to make it fun.
So tell us about Catholic mindset coaching, what it is, and you've already distinguished it from secular coaching a bit, but would you mind telling us a bit more along those lines?
I'll start with mindset coaching.
Okay.
The type that I've been taught in, and we've kind of taken into our own training. So we train other Catholic mindset coaches as well. So we've taken that into our own training, but we've added to it. We've brought in the soul piece that has been left out. But it's grounded in cognitive behavioral therapy techniques. So it is called cognitive behavioral coaching. So we are not therapists. We do not claim to be therapists. We don't work with people who are mentally ill. We work with somebody who is what we would call above baseline, functioning in normal, society, but also wants to improve, wants to grow in virtue, has a particular goal. So that's kind of where we come in. We do work alongside some other counselors where they will pass people off to, pass their people off to us because they're like, they're good. They're above where we've got them to this point and they just want to go after this goal or achieve this goal. So cognitive behavioral coaching is, in the simplest terms, our premise is your thoughts lead to your emotions, which lead to your actions. And lo and behold, this also is aligned with St. Thomas Aquinas's philosophy of psychology. What we add to it, what makes it Catholic, is this soul piece, is our intellect and our will. Matt mentioned it before. These are our spiritual powers of the soul. This is in our catechism. We have been endowed with an intellect and a will, this ability to think about our thinking, this ability to judge what is true and what is good, this ability to reason through things and make conclusions and then
understand.
choose the greatest good. So what we've added to it is this next tier element. Okay. Like, so we have the cognitive behavioral coaching, more on the human material level. And then the immaterial level, we teach people how to think about their thinking and to choose the good, their greatest good.
Yeah. And that's kind of the big distinguishing point. So I think that even in the secular world, there's this realization, okay, like you think and it inclines you towards an emotion, and then emotion inclines you to some sort of an action. And so therefore you clean up your thinking. There's the phrase, clean up your thinking, and you're going to get the results that you want in your life. I remember even before we went Metanoia Catholic, I really tried to keep it like what we're putting together, a secular program. So my thought was just like, I don't want to limit my market. Frankly, that's what it was.
I fought it.
Well, and she did.
I was like, no way.
And so I put together a program for veterans, and because I'm a veteran myself, and teaching them these mindset coaching skills. And so it's like, okay, I taught them how to be able to take thoughts captive, to be able to really think about what they're thinking about, and then bring them to a place where they have this power. They have this freedom to choose what they're going to think. Then I got to this question. Okay, what should I choose? What should I choose to think? And that was a question about the good. And I couldn't arbitrate. I didn't have any sort of touchstone. If I didn't have Christ, I didn't have any sort of touchstone to be able to answer that question without it being relativistic or arbitrary or self-referencing, which is where you see the big deviation between Catholic mindset coaching and secular mindset coaching. We coach in the context that there has been a good that has been revealed to us, that is not something that is self-determined, but something that is discovered through grace and through participating in the sacramental life of the church, and taking in what has been revealed through divine revelation and through the traditions of the church and the teachings of the church. And so we have this standard to which we can hold up certain thoughts and say this one is good or bad, or we can say things are sinful or not sinful, or vicious, or virtuous, or true, or not true. Where if you and what we found is even going through other secular certifications, they really shy away from anything that says right, wrong, good, bad, virtuous. They move away from that language, and they couch it with like, it's just not leading to team success. Okay, well, what's team success? Something that's very self-deterministic. So that is a huge piece. And then the other piece is we realize that the mind is a battlefield. There's a spiritual battlefield that's raging. And when you don't acknowledge this, it's kind of like walking out into a battlefield. Well, meanwhile, there's ambushes that are being set out all over the place, and you're not showing up with the right tools. And so this is another thing, the fact that there's a spiritual warfare, and Christ in the name of Jesus has given us tools with the sacramental life of the church and many other things to really fight well and really share in Christ's victory.
So I'm sure you've encountered skeptics along the way. How do you respond to those who are skeptical to the need for or usefulness of coaching, especially in this type of coaching?
Okay. I'm like, I actually, have we run into skeptics along the way?
I mean, I think I was the biggest skeptic to begin with.
Okay.
to this.
And I think that was how the Lord worked with us, because we both were kind of skeptical of this. And then when we bought into it, we had already done all of the research, or not all of it. Obviously, there's like so much more to learn, but like we've done our own. And so like any objections that we came up where it's like, oh yeah, no, I've already researched that. If I could answer the question to the coaching piece too, is like, is coaching right for me? Is that kind of an element of this?
I think also like that resistance, like, why would I need a coach? Why don't I just pray about it? That line, like, just pray about it. And why would I want to have a coach help me through something like that?
I can kind of only speak like subjectively from my own experience. And I'm like, I personally never experienced so much quick growth if I did not have some type of mentor or an ideal that I was trying to get to. And I mean, this is why we need people, we need formators, we need mentors, we need good Catholic teachers, mentors, formators. There's a
virtue called good counsel for a reason.
Yes, to help us reach those, go to those places. And that's really what the coach comes in. I mean, I'm of the thought that like everyone would benefit from a coach, but of course it's always your choice, right? So a good Catholic coach, we'll say. Everyone can benefit from that.
I guess it's that spirit of docility, that the willingness to enter into that. And that's probably outside. I don't know, maybe it factors in a little bit to
it's a bit of
focusing on making a decision like whether to homeschool or not. It would take some docility to enter into this kind of discernment process, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit of a self-awareness piece too. And usually where we help people to identify perhaps some areas where they could benefit from coaching or where they feel stuck. They're kind of in the same kind of repetitive cycle, and they don't feel very empowered to move forward from it. Perhaps they're unaware of a bias. Perhaps they're unaware of just even what's going on in their interior life. There's something that's
most times they're not aware of that.
There's something that's just very cathartic about having somebody that's skilled in the ability to kind of mirror back to you what's going on, so that you can just grow in some understanding yourself.
We call them like thought detectives.
A really good sounding board.
We train our coaches to be thought detectives, to kind of like go in like, what is true and what is good here, and ask, appropriate questions to just reveal to the person, to not tell, just to reveal to them, be like, and then also give them their choice, their free choice that they already have, but remind them that they have this. And you're like, okay, so what do we choose from this point? So that's always helpful. I mean, personally, I think that would be helpful to anyone. Yeah.
Yes, I'm with you there. I like to throw out the devil's advocate question sometimes for those.
Nice. I love it.
Why do I? Yeah. So thinking about these concepts and applying them to how we can grow in virtue and holiness as Catholic parents or students or families, whoever's listening, who are homeschooling and contemplating, how can we relate these concepts to each other? And when we're contemplating a decision such as whether to homeschool or not, how does that play into what it will mean for our pursuit of holiness and cultivation of virtue?
I think this one.
Go for it.
I think the goal is we always want to show up clean. Okay. And when I say with a clean mind, it means I really know the reasons, and I am happy with the reasons for why I'm doing whatever I'm doing. Every action that we have in the way that we show up is always born from some sort of a thought. And so the first thing is making sure, the first gift I would say in a homeschooling situation is you as the parent. If you're applying these skills to yourself, you're starting to get and becoming a student of your own interior life, and then you're receiving the benefits from it. You're naturally going to start to get curious about what's going on in somebody else's interior life, and then being able to guide them in ways that the Lord has already guided you to overcome certain vices or habitual sins in your own life. And not just, and lest you fall into this, well, I'm just going to tell you what to do sort of situation. But no, when you're really capturing the transformation from an interior standpoint, you're much more aware of it. And I think you're much more sensitive, at least it's made me much more sensitive to how the Lord may work that transformation through somebody else. And just recognizing that it's the Lord that's doing the work. I may be the one. We've got a journal that kind of helps people to really mind their own thoughts in their interior life. And we do it for the most part on a daily basis because there's always thoughts that need to be taken captive. And the more we can become a student of what's going on in our own interior life, I think that equips us to help our kids to get curious about their own thinking. Because quite frankly, education has been reduced down to broad strokes here, more about memorizing and like just regurgitating facts and less about actually using the full capacity of our God-given powers of our intellect and learning how to think about our thinking.
Yes. Yeah, I would say practical tools would be journaling. I mean, I and specifically ours, which you actually can get for free on our website. It's just the outline of it. But it is the way that we've designed it is it takes you through the material part of your mind first and identifies like the problem, or in this case, the decision that you haven't made yet. And then it brings it through even a repentance, renouncing, forgiveness section. And then the climax of the daily journal is the metanoia process, which actually means to elevate one's mind or to change one's mind. That's the Greek word for that, or conversion. Yeah. And it's really where we're asking the Lord for his interpretation. And it's a prayer journal. So it turns out to be a prayer journal. Starts off mindset journal, turns into a prayer journal. that's a really practical way you could start. I think just thinking about your thinking and reflecting on it. And we give some really basic tools even at the back of the journal. If you get the hard copy, kind of like how to go through each one of the exercises. There's 7 exercises in it. We also have an academy specifically for people who, and one of the months that we had in the academy was how to make decisions. One of my favorite parts of that month that we taught was we helped people with values. Identify what you value, because that does play into what you decide ultimately, what you like. And so we had different segments of the value worksheet where it was like family. What do you value about your family? What do you value about parenting or your kids? Not even what you value about them, but in this case, you could actually create some homeschooling questions. Like, what do I value about my child's education? Mm-hmm. And then we had another worksheet that we would take people through once they actually went through the values worksheet. It helped them make a decision based off of that. Mm-hmm. But what was happening where we were identifying some people were bringing up values in coaching sessions that were driven by fear. Hmm. And to be able to just step back and discern that and say, okay, like, do you even like the fact that this is driven by fear? Or would you rather it be kind of a value be driven by freedom or right love or charity or the desire to grow in holiness and grow in any of those areas? So, yeah.
I think for many people identifying, they may have a sense to varying degrees of some of their values, and that plays very strongly into whether they are contemplating and making a decision, especially like a change in homeschooling. All right, it also goes for doing it from the get-go, from the beginning. You know. So let's talk about how approaching this decision using your process and your Catholic mindset coaching principles can help us get through this decision. I know you guys recently had a YouTube video on decision making, and probably drawn much from your course you were just mentioning. So, mm-hmm. Would you help us kind of zero in on this homeschooling decision?
Yeah, I think it's again, the goal here is to do it from a very clean place, and so before you even kind of start going through this criteria that we've got for making this decision, I always want to invite people to be just a student of really what's going on in their interior life. What are the thoughts that are there? Because again, as soon as we have some sort of a lie or a false belief, for example, this is what Catholic parents do. They should homeschool their kids, or it's not right to send your kids to someplace else to get their education, or public schooling even is always bad. When we take a particular situation, we make it a universal claim. It never leads us to really a place of freedom. It puts all kinds of arbitrary restrictions on ourselves that are self-imposed, and it actually violates our freedom. So we want people, when we say a clean place, we want people to make it in full knowledge of perhaps even where their biases are, and bring those really to the Lord to kind of breathe his truth onto. So that's the one thing.
And that real quick, that can be identified by just answering the question, why do I want to do this?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's just such a simple question, but like, why do I want to homeschool my kids? Sorry for interrupting.
No, I think that's fine. So that's like step number one is clean place. But then I like really looking at kind of what's going on. Like what is a series of how do I put this? There's kind of an obedience structure that our life provides to us. Oftentimes people say, I just don't know what God's will is for my life. When I say, well, I don't think you're really paying attention to what's going on. He's speaking to you constantly, and he's speaking in very human ways. Mm-hmm. And so what do I mean by that? What are some of the very human ways that God speaks to us? Well, the first thing we have to know as Catholics is that we have this universal call to holiness. And so we have an idea of what that looks like. The church reveals to us what that looks like. It's growing in the life of virtue. And so we're all called to that. Every single one of us is called to be set apart. And every single one of us is called in some way to take part in the Great Commission. And so knowing that that is what it means as part of our identity of being Catholic Christians, we can start to look at a decision and say, okay, is this decision inclining me to a life of growth and virtue, or one that's actually, I feel it's taking me the other way? All right. Or is this something that's creating more opportunities to participate in a way that I'm capable of participating in that Great Commission? Or is it actually sending me to kind of take my lamp and put a bushel basket over the top of it? Right. So those are kind of like the first conditions. The next ones I really like to bring up are your vocation, your big V vocation. So certainly we have the married life. Okay, is this decision going to be something that's going to help me to live out the vows of my married vocation better? Right. And I think for a lot of homeschooling parents, perhaps even where there might be one that says, yes, homeschooling, and one, no, I'm not on board yet. We have to know that ultimately, if we go about this decision and we don't consider what's healthy for the marriage and keeping and living our marriage vows excellently, we are going to do potentially harm to our marriage, which is the worst thing that we can do for the education of our kids.
Yeah. I can I pause here real quick?
Yep.
I think one thing, even between Matt and I being married, I know that the Lord wants us to be in unity.
Right.
You know, when we aren't, that's a sign that we both need to walk away and pray, do our journal probably. But also to understand why is this house divided, you know, in this case. And you guys were sharing with us earlier that comes up a lot, you know, like there's one parent who wants to homeschool and one parent who doesn't. And to look at that as an opportunity for the Lord to speak into their marriage at that moment, to pause and say, okay, how can this person be right? And this, and maybe I need to just listen to them, or vice versa, whatever. But to pause and look at your own thinking. Cause I can't even tell you how many times I'm like, but Lord, I'm right. You know, like we've just walked away from each other and I'm like, yeah, but I know you understand this, but I'm right. Right. Like I'm the one who knows the fullness of the truth here. But it's really, that's never, good fruits will never come from that. So he will speak through your vocation and that unity. And so I just wanted to pause there. I think that's actually applicable to what you guys probably see on a daily basis, or talking to parents.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up, Aaron, because it's right. Like those points of contention are not there to, we don't need to be afraid of those things, because we know that. I love that you bring up that premise, and like God wants us to be united. John chapter 17, I pray that they may be one as I and the Father are one. Of course, he would want that for my marriage more than anything, and for my family. And so, all right, Lord, I know that you will bring this to fulfillment. There's no reason that you wouldn't want this. And so you're allowing this for some reason, perhaps for my growth or for my wife's growth, or both of ours, probably both of ours. Let's get curious about that. And so that allows you to kind of fall back a little bit on that Galatians chapter 6, bear one another's burdens patiently. And when we pause and we say, the goal is not to make the decision about our kids. The goal is to be aligned first and understand one another. Yeah. Let's just kind of like, let's start there. Let's get on the same page. I think because everybody wants to be heard in the conversation.
And also you add in all of those other like dynamics, which is like, you know, somebody like being like, why are you going to homeschool your kids? Like your siblings or a friend of yours. And like, I don't really understand why. You do want to have that foundation with your spouse to say, no, we've decided this together. We are both, you know, the primary catechist, the primary, like this is our vocation. Our child is our child. And so we've decided this together. So you want that to actually approach those conversations that will probably almost always come up.
Yeah. So you've got the universal call to holiness. Then you have your vocation, primarily your marriage, right? Getting that right first. And then I like to say, okay, well, what is your state in life right now? And what I mean by that, it's just like, if we just took a snapshot in your life, what are really the circumstances in which we're operating? What's your job? Is it are both parents working right now? Do you need that income for both parents? Do you have a child with a disability? Do you have, maybe the parent may be ill in or have some sort of illness, or have some sort of mental illness or healing that they have to work through before the conditions can be really good for this. And so those conditions are there. When we approach those, it's like, okay, the state in life and it's always a call to be excellent in your state in life. That's what the virtues are always bringing us to, they mean excellence, a state of excellence in our given state in life. And we can be obedient to what that standard of excellence is based on our circumstances. Then we can start to say, okay, you know what, if we're going to do this homeschooling thing or not, or say do the homeschooling, then I think it's going to compromise my ability to do my job excellently over here. That might be something, or vice versa. So,
or I'm going to be super resentful to my husband or something, right? Like, so that would actually compromise the vocational element of this.
Well, that starts to kind of get into like even, your desires, which are subordinate really to state in life. I think state in life are kind of those obligations are, it's like, okay, we have to pay our bills. We got to do these things, whether we like it or not. But desire is an important part of this. And sometimes if the person just does not want to do it, that's an important thing to consider, at least to say, put it on the table as a consideration. And then you can decide whether or not you're going to, okay, I'm not 100% on board with this, but I'm willing to say yes to it. And then we kind of get into, okay, once we make that decision, we just choose either that we're going to have some sort of a reevaluation period, but like that decision is going to be the thing. We're not going to second guess it. We're going to choose ahead of time that we're not going to be resentful or regretful about our decision, because regret is just a thought that you can either choose or not. It's like, oh, we shouldn't have done that. Okay, well, all right. Well, if you don't want to feel regret, don't choose that thought. Like just decide ahead of time that you're in this and you're going to learn from it. I always love being able to, if it's not a permanent decision, to just allow it to not be a permanent decision, but give yourself a real time to say, like, this is what the good college try looks like with homeschooling. And then we can reevaluate later on.
And what's great about homeschooling is it's not a permanent decision. There's like every year is different, right? Like, so it's like, okay, next year we can reevaluate. And so
my sister does it every year for all of her kids.
Yep.
Some of her kids are homeschooled. Some of them are going to a great Catholic school. It's a new evaluation period every year.
Yeah. And every kid's different, right? So what would benefit the child the most, I think.
Yeah. It goes to your state in life again, the state of your kid.
I think personally, even with mindset coaching, like we kind of give you the broad overview structure of like how to discern what to choose. But I always go to the particular and like, what is the what are some particular thoughts that are coming up that are creating unnecessary tension in your life?
Do you have some examples
in making this decision? Well, you guys actually gave me some examples and like people thinking that they're inadequate to do this. Like I could see that coming up, and that comes up actually a lot in coaching. Even people being like, am I even adequate to do this? And so like, I've coached a lot of people on that. And so I would take that particular thought and take it through what we call the reason cycle. So like we would see where it would lead. We would see if it's true. We would see even the tonality behind it. That's a discernment level question. It's kind of like, is this an accusational tone? Like you're inadequate to teach this.
We would define our terms. What does adequate, if you're inadequate, if you're so sure that you're inadequate, then what does adequate look like?
Yes.
Like, let's define what that term is.
Yeah. Because most people don't, it's kind of a moving target. Like it's just, I don't know. It's something that I just never am. Right. Like,
but they're sure that they're inadequate, but they can't tell you what adequate looks like.
So there is some measurement that they know about, but they can never really say like what is adequate or even what is adequate enough to get started. And so even just working on that particular sentence in their mind, the first thing we say is thoughts are optional, but it's the craziest thing. People cling to those thoughts because it's very comfortable and familiar. And so what we want to do is show where this thought is leading them. And then that kind of loosens the grip a little bit.
So they can choose whether or not they want to continue it, knowing that the fruits are gone.
It seems super interesting that in my mind, when you're talking about this universal in particular, that probably your biggest enemies in the world would be salesmen. Who are saying this is right for everybody. Here's all the reasons why you should buy this car, buy whatever. It's almost like you're deconstructing that to get back to the original. Do I really need this thing? I mean, in a very simplistic way, but I would think that that's somewhat of what the task is in coaching somebody, is to get to the heart of do you need this car? Why do you think you need this car? Whatever the decision is. I mean, is that, I mean, that sounds sort of like what you're kind of describing. I just see it as the exact opposite of sales.
Yeah. I mean, what you described there was really like St. Ignatius' third order discernment. I mean, we're really just weighing the options. We're kind of looking at both sides. If we're buying the car, what are the things that we like? What's our criteria? First, it's like kind of what is our criteria for seeing value in this thing that I'm potentially buying? And does this product meet that criteria? This is why Aaron brought up, it's so important, especially with this decision on homeschooling. What are your values? And what are your values in your home and your family life? And then what are your options? And which of those options is going to allow you to experience more of the things that you value?
Yes. And once the values are properly discerned, I think that's another thing too, because a lot of people are like, oh, my values, it's just very subjective. And like, but once your values are held up next to the values that we uphold in our faith, and we're like, oh yeah, no, I like that. Actually, that's aligned with truth. And that's aligned with not just my goodness, but everybody's greatest goodness in my family, because that is the state in which I am in.
Yeah. I like that you said discerning values, because sometimes these things that are value. Yeah. We teach this in our workshop. Sometimes values, or like kind of core things that are driving decisions in our lives, sometimes they're not really virtuous. Sometimes they're vicious. Like one of the things that I realized when I went through my own worksheet was I really value other people's opinions of me. And so that becomes a criteria as to whether or not to go forward, is how might somebody think of me? Well, that doesn't sound really virtuous.
You're like, oh, I think that lines up with a vice called vanity a little bit. Yeah, sorry, just like throwing you under. But
it's my core.
Yeah, just to answer what we were talking about before, though, what was happening, I've been studying cognitive distortions, actually, and these come up all the time in coaching. And this is a CBT term, cognitive behavioral therapy term. But it's interesting to me that there are secular psychologists out there that use this type of therapy, because every single one of these cognitive distortions is like a fallacy, is like a
logical fallacy.
A logical fallacy, but something that is directly opposed to the truth.
Yeah. Contrary to reality.
Right. And so I'm like, so don't you need to know what truth is to know that this is a cognitive distortion? But one of the things they were saying was taking particulars and making them universals, and overgeneralization is one of them, where it's like, oh, you take two points of evidence and you're like, you make this massive overgeneralization, like it's always
I got
this
confused
way.
Twice helping my kid in homeschooling. I'm just a terrible teacher.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I'm a terrible teacher. Right. And then you make a label for yourself. And it shows up in black or white thinking. There's all these different cognitive distortions. So exactly what you were saying, Jordan, about that is it. Yes. Like we need to just also keep asking ourselves. So a great question that your listeners might be able to ask themselves is, what is also true, and what is the more accurate way of depicting this? So in that case, with that thought, I'm inadequate, or I might be inadequate to be a homeschool teacher. You could also say, what else is true? Well, I also might be adequate in these particular subjects. So that's a more accurate way of saying it. And it probably won't lead you to just shutting the conversation down immediately.
Yeah. And it's not just positive thinking too. I mean, someone might hear what Aaron just said. And it's like, oh, so we're just thought swapping. And it's just like, no, these thoughts need to be believable, actually. And they need to be ones that are actually aligned with reality, lest we fall into mental illness, which is when our thoughts are not aligned with reality.
I really have been enjoying this, especially even kind of go back to that marriage and vocationally being together. I mean, when you're talking about we're having this tension, as you're saying, you want the unity. So that's actually, it's just becoming obvious. That's an opportunity then. I mean, so more importantly than this specific question is what's underlying, I think, that's really the division here. What's the cause that we need? Because if you're both intending what's best for each other, heaven, being with our Lord, and for your children, clearly the end should be the same. So it's either not seeing things the same way, seeing things differently, it seems like, or as you're saying here, well, actually, that's just fundamentally, or seeing things just incorrectly, as you were just saying. And those thoughts have to be changed because, you have to You have to follow the truth, right?
Or there's some sort of block that's there. I mean, a lot of the time
It's
people,
usually fear.
Sometimes people just have an association and it's a thought that they take as true, but they never even challenged it. And so they're bringing that thought error to the conversation, and it's setting a precedent for where you're starting the conversation on things. And so if say, for example, a husband is coming to the conversation with homeschool kids are weird, and that's like the thought error that's there, or that's kind of what we would say an association that is there. And maybe he's got a ton of evidence. Maybe every time like the homeschool kids showed up to the athletic fields, they were just really quirky, or everybody thought that they were weird, like whatever. And based on his soda straw, perspective of reality. So that's one of those things. At first, it's just like, rather than just taking the bait and being like, homeschool kids aren't weird, like to say, that's so interesting that you think that. I really want to understand why you think that's true. Tell me, like, tell me why you think that. And it starts to open the person. Now we're not going into this back and forth, but we're seeking understanding here, because the goal is like, we know that that's not true. Right. Mm-hmm. And the goal, but there's plenty of kids that aren't homeschooled that are very weird too. Whatever. Like, let's just,
yes, but could the opposite be true?
But that's kind of like even some of the things that you might bring to the conversation. It's a different dialogue that you get into at that point when you're seeking understanding and connection.
Mm-hmm. That goes back to that docility that we were talking about earlier, the willingness to consider that there is some information that might be missing. There's more information to take in. Yeah. I think it would be great. I know you have a lot of overlap in your areas of knowledge regarding the Strengths Finder and the St. Catherine of Siena Institute. I'd love to get you guys kind of talking about that a bit. Maybe with the time we have left, could we consider some of the other factors that would influence some of this decision making, such as our own temperaments, which you guys have a podcast series going about that. I'm very excited because I am very keenly interested in the temperaments, consider myself phlegmatic mostly. So I'm excited about hearing those as they come out. And also our various strengths and spiritual gifts. Stephen has talked to us before about the St. Catherine of Siena Institute. So could we
Stephen,
consider some of these? You guys are.
I got so excited to see your information. It's like, they love the same things I love.
They know it.
Yes.
So I'll get out of the way, and I'd love to hear you talk more about factors. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's funny. So what Matt was breaking down before, kind of that element of like we're all called to holiness, the state in life, the vocation state. The next level of what we were going to be talking about was, we talked about season, but we have a podcast about that. Mm-hmm. But then kind of your desires, your gifts, your strengths, and your spiritual gifts, like the areas in which the Lord has worked through you the best, right? Where like the ones with the least amount of obstacles to grace, that he just flows through you. Dunamis is the word, the Greek word for power, kind of. And
Matthew 25:15, to some he gave 5, to some he gave 2, to another he gave 1, each in accord with his ability, his dunamis, which is that power that is proper to somebody's nature. And so we have these natural abilities, which that's where I see my strength connections to scripture. Is like there's these God-given natural abilities that already incline us to excellence in certain areas and not in other areas, which is great because then we get to lean on the body of Christ to really be complete.
And, we talk about grace being the change agent, but like grace builds upon nature. And so you need to kind of have that ordered nature at first, or at least know naturally, what am I good at? What are these gifts that God has given to me? These natural gifts, strengths, or, that God has given to me. Chances are those are going to be the areas of grace that he's going to work in me, in my own merit, but also through me to, everybody else out there. So,
yeah. And and when we say like grace builds upon nature, and grace actually elevates our nature, elevates like the fruits that we produce to have a supernatural quality to that. We call that meritorious. That's what it is. I mean, this is building up treasures in heaven that we actually get to take with us into the next life, which is so exciting. And where do charisms fit into that? I think we're starting, honestly, we read a book, The Charismatic Graces, from Father Chad Ripperger, that's kind of really blown up for us. I don't want to say blown up, that may be extreme, but it's starting to,
It's a cognitive distortion.
it's getting us thinking a little bit more about our Catholic theology of grace versus Protestant theology of grace. And he makes some distinctions in there between the charismatic gifts as something where there is no merit associated with them, because it is completely God's grace showing up. And it's something that in the early church was very prevalent, but not so much right now, versus these, our natural dunamin, these abilities where when we live these things out in a meritorious way, in a virtuous way, that's kind of where it's very similar to the way that we understand perhaps Sherry Waddell charisms. And I got to look into this because I don't want to, well, a little bit more, but there seems to be a strong connection between that and strengths now.
There will.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. I'd love to get your take on that too,
please.
Stephen.
Yeah. I'm actually, I've gone through the gift interview training through the St. Catherine of Siena Institute. Love that.
Awesome.
I also do something just to, I guess you know my background a little bit. I was a business director, executive director, and so kind of leadership was where I was always trying to develop people. So really strong feelings of, first, for me personally, God's providence. So God is created everybody for a purpose, a vocation, a specific purpose, and it's more particular than that. You know, when your dishwasher breaks, I don't know why you use this example every time, but the dishwasher breaks when you're heading out the door, and you think, oh, this is just going to ruin my day, sort of thing. It's like, no. God allowed that to happen right now. He could have made it not break. He could do that. He's all powerful. He's in control. So we go through that and then kind of look at, so then you have to pay attention, as you were saying, to ability. So what am I good at? What do I enjoy? What do I love? Because God's drawing you toward your vocation with those desires, with those gifts to do what you should do well, or what you could do well. So yeah, I do, that drew me towards a Highland ability battery test at one point, where I administer that, which you look at, it's time test to determine natural abilities. So use that to see, where are my abilities? That doesn't mean skills yet, but yeah, then to start looking at as you're entering into your relationship with God, as you want that personal relationship, as you're developing into that intentional discipleship, as Sherry Waddell will talk about, that's when you start to see these fruits start to come about. I've seen people, as they open themselves up to being participating in God's will, with the Holy Spirit interacting through them. And then you just start to see these experiences which you can't explain, where you can tell the presence, that the presence is there of the Holy Spirit. There's a joy. There are effects that go beyond what you can really explain, which are more than reason. They're not reasonable. They're unreasonable in the productivity. But then to see that each person has specific gifts, again, as Sherry would say, to give to others. So grace is meant to be given to others. And that even helps you then, as you're discerning those. There's no magical test for these. It's a discernment process, but it does start to tell you what God has planned for you and what way he wants you to act. Because as I was discerning at one point, it's like, I really want leadership. I really want to have that charism of leadership where you just bring people together and everybody's running off. But so, the process then actually kind of becomes, well, I'm going to try to lead. I'm going to try to move people toward this good thing for the church. And for me, it'd be like, yes, we're going over here. And I'd look behind it. There's nobody there. So that was not one of the charisms, at least not at this point in my life. And so that helps me. It helps me to know I don't need to be in front necessarily, at least not at this time. That's not what God wants me to do. So, that wasn't the only, you had to try it over and over again, because sometimes we can get in our own selfishness, we want the charisms to be for us, or maybe God just doesn't need you to act in that way. But through continued discernment, you can start to push things away. And sometimes that's more valuable than actually knowing the specific, discerning positively something. So, so lots of interest in all of those things. I would always start with, when I get these young people in right out of college, and so I was trying to mentor them, and so I would start out with free will. So Viktor Frankl, basically, you can't choose what's going to happen to you, but you can choose your reaction. Mm-hmm. And then to see that there's a natural law that you can choose what you're going to do, but you can't necessarily choose the consequences. I mean, so the consequences go along with your choice. It would be kind of the next place that I would go. But then it's kind of self-mastery and self-integrity, so that you're true to yourself, you're honest to yourself, and you form the habits, the discipline to do what you need to do. And then you start thinking about, you start with a long goal. Well, anyway, you could go through all of those things, but then it's doing finding your abilities, finding your interests, and going through and trying to give them opportunities to explore those areas and see if they align. But
yeah, Steve, you'll be excited. Yeah, in the academy, we're actually starting next month. We're going to be rolling out once a week. We're going to go through every single one of the signature themes, and it's about living them virtuously. So we get name it, claim it, aim it through Gallup, but we like name it, claim it, tame it, aim it, and because we know that when we don't live these things virtuously, they show up as really contrary to strengths.
Yeah.
So, Aaron,
an overuse pattern.
Yeah.
But to bring it back to the homeschooling piece, right? I think the Lord is creative. So if he is calling you to do this and you're aligned with your spouse, if he's calling you like to be a homeschool parent, there is an element of being like, of just allowing him to equip you and to not get in your head around it. I mean, like, I just don't have the charism of teaching. I never have, you know what I mean? Like, well, who knows? Maybe you were just never in that opportunity. Like, as Steve was saying, he was saying how, it kind of depends on what position you're in. I've taken that charism test a couple of times. There was one when I was working for the church and I scored high in hospitality because I was always throwing events, at the church, but like, I'm not high in it anymore. And because it was the position or the state or particular season that I was in my life that could allow that power, that God's power to work through you. And I think there's just this element of, Bonnie, you've been saying this whole time, like this docility, this yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord. Because like in the very beginning, even in my own coaching, now we teach, and I never considered myself a good teacher.
She's very good now.
But it's because I love what I teach. And so there's also that element that plays in, but I could have used that as an excuse to say, well, I never scored high in teaching and I don't really have the strengths that like say that it's a good teacher. And I'm a sanguine. So that means I'm like really, disorganized and I like could never write, a class curriculum. We get in our heads about these things. It's like so simple, but like if the Lord is calling you to do it, to go, okay, yes, Lord. And then just see how creatively he works through that. Because the way I teach, very different from how he teaches and very different from how Susie over here. And, it just shows up in such a different way.
Yeah.
But if he's calling you to do it, he'll qualify the called, right?
And calling you to do it also. This is another thing that I think is super practical, but very helpful for parents that are discerning homeschooling is to really create an image of what that looks like. What it is. Yeah. Because some people, if there's different images, that means there's different goals, which means that spouses are going to go in different directions. And they're going to be like, what are you doing? Why'd you go in this way? And it's just like, well, I'm on the same page as you. It's like, no, you're not. And so that oftentimes just getting on a shared map, so to speak, of this is what the goal looks like, really allows, it's super practical, very easy to do, but you have to put in, like, get down to how much time are we going to be spending this? What is the space in the home that we are going to be using for this? What are the investments that we are going to have to make this space suitable? What are the conditions where we are going to take a day off, or who's going to be doing the administrative thing that's going to be able to report to, this school board that we've accomplished these goals so our kid can get this. Like all of those things need to be really, those practical things need to be laid out, or else you don't know what you're saying yes to. And so you can't give your full yes. So it helps that
yes.
understanding, achieve understanding.
I'm laughing because this is like Matt's strengths and his temperament's showing up right now. And it's so different from mine. Like, I'm like, I didn't think of any of those. I'm like, I'm just excited to homeschool, you know, but I think also another element here though, is allowing the way you homeschool or the way you school your children to look different from others.
Love that.
According to your abilities, according to your strengths. So it's like, I am not good at math. I'm going to get a tutor. Or I'm going to, I don't know, send my child off to this other person who's way better. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend and like think I'm good at math, like try to think those thoughts. I probably will never be good at it, and nor do I care about it. So like to be okay with that and say, and I know this person loves to teach math. Yeah. So I give them this gift by like actually.
Or I'm not high discipline. Yeah. And so like, I'm not going to hold myself to like creating a spreadsheet of what we're going to be doing every single day, but I'm going to have some goals that are going to be like, we're going to hit these widgets and we're going to do it by such and such a time. And I'm going to allow my day to be a little bit more fluid. Like that's kind of maybe that's how the person operates and gets it done. If you look at the way that Aaron and I structure our weeks, completely different, but we still like,
I just don't structure my week. So it is very different.
Not true. Overgeneralization.
All of those concerns are, again, working together with the parents, and then you get figuring things out. Now, it's always nice, like at a place like Kolbe, you can call up our advisors or admissions, and they can give you at least some parameters if you're just completely just don't know the answers to any of those things. They give you some help, but a lot of it is just like you're saying, giving yourself some time to experiment, because you know, as a father, I remember at one point, it's like, oh, well, I can help my children out with math or science. And then it was, you know, after a 10-hour work day, coming home and realizing there's no way I'm going to consistently do math or science with this child. So I could decide I would, and then spend less time at work and do things, but that wasn't an option at the time. So it was just, no, I'm not reliable. I'll have to tell you, my wife, you can't rely on me for this. So we have to get help outside of that for this, at least at this time. So yeah, it's feeling out some of those things as well. I mean, you can go in with a plan, like we're going to have a schoolroom and we're going to do all of this and we're going to get the whiteboard. And then it turns out your kids like to go hide in a corner and do their math lesson where it's nice and quiet and there aren't any distractions. Yeah. So you just don't know. A bunch of melancholics. Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oops, I gave myself away here. But.
I love how you phrase the how creative God is, of course, and how he will show up in response when you say yes, how he is going to show up to that. It will likely not be the way we expect, or it might not be, just to leave the space that it won't be what we're looking for. For example, the ways that Kolbe can assist families with whatever they need in the form of, you can do all the homeschool at home yourself using our course plans. You can enroll them full-time in our online academy. You could do that. You could do a mix of that. There are all the different ways that Kolbe can work together with families to meet those areas where parents feel more confident in some areas than others, and in all the ways. Yes. So that's an example of that creativity.
This is so cool.
Yeah.
What you guys are doing.
It's so cool. Like just when you were just explaining it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have so many people I need to tell about this too. Yeah. One thing that Steve, you said about an experiment. I love using that language, especially when you are about ready to make a decision that might be a little scary. And that's another thing. I think a lot of people think once they make a decision that they won't be afraid. But I'm always like, fear usually comes along for the ride. It's just not in the driver's seat anymore. You know, it's just like in the back seat. It's like backseat driver. Like you're like, I know. But some language that helps me is, this is an experiment. Let's look at this as like an adventure, or like, let's just kind of see it. It's not permanent. So we can kind of play around with it. We can see what areas, maybe I'm really good at teaching, or some areas that my kid needs some space, or they need some one-on-one time, so
Yeah,
I
we
think
can
it's
always
just,
reevaluate later.
yes, using that language though, that flexibility language, even in your thoughts, which
It's true. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
thing. That's one of the reasons why it's helpful. It's true.
Mhm.
So, and it gives you, it leans you towards freedom.
it just reframes the whole thing. Yeah.
Keeps you in a place of freedom.
Mhm.
If your only other option is failure, so either we've decided and now we do this forever, otherwise we're a failure. That
Yes.
that as well then creates that you've become a slave then to this choice that you've made in the past, rather than choosing it again in in that moment, in the time when you're moving forward.
Yeah. And all
really
failure is, by definition, is like the omission of the work required to accomplish a goal. That's it. It's like the omission of the work.
Like,
That's it. So the only way it really fails is to stop, by definition.
we
which
call
is
that
so
failing
interesting.
ahead of time by saying I'm going to be a failure, because they just usually stop at that point.
True.
Yeah. And then just celebrate the little gains also. Like you always get to, we have a podcast called Baptizing the Gap in the Gain. That's always just like, okay, as you're going through this trial, like we just sit around the dinner table at night, even with our 4-year-old, and we say, hey, what was a win from today? And it's always like looking back and measuring what's something that was great. I invite everybody to do that. It's such a beautiful kind of fun thing to do as a family. Is it's like, because you get an idea like what your kid values too, or what your spouse values. How often do we have those conversations? But another thought.
It's great. It's a good one. Good one. Lots of great food for thought here today. We sure do appreciate everything you've offered to us today. You guys offer lots of resources. We will include your website, Metanoia Catholic, in our show notes, and a link to your podcast is linked on that website as well, I know, and it's in the podcast apps and everything. We'll also include some relevant Kolbecast episodes that we've aired before that tie into this conversation. Matt and Aaron, thank you so much for this time together and all you've offered us today.
Thank you so much. We love what you guys are doing. And I love the innovation behind it, and being creative and helping these kids get good, solid education. I love it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for sticking with us in the Catholic Coaching Podcast. If you like what you heard,
Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again.